Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel and welcome to Good and Evil, Part 2, Amari Becoming a Legend. Before I start, if you do like this content and you would like to hear more of this story and all of its goodness, please hit the subscribe button and let's share this goodness. I'm loving writing it and I hope you love listening. Okay, let's jump right in. How did I arrive at this wonderful existence? With everything I deal with, I still feel as if my heart is healing and each day has potential. That is what Mumbi told herself. She thought back to the night of Amari's birth, how this bundle of joy and wisdom arrived with purpose. When she opened her eyes and Mumbi saw their color, she somehow found peace. Not something she arrived at for many years, but while looking down at Amari, brought it along with a feeling of hope and potential. Then Amari's little hand wrapped around Mumbi's finger. The vision that came and went brought questions to the surface. Was this her wishful thinking? After all, she had dreamed of Nero every night. She often had flashed where she would live their times together while walking her land. Not a lot made sense about what happened to her, but it did happen. And Amari was the blessed result. After Amari unwrapped her hand, Mumbi cut the umbilical cord, cleaned Amari, breastfed her, then waited to pass the afterbirth. Once all was done, she gently placed Amari on the bed in the center of blankets Mumbi had styled in a circle, and they both slept. Outside her home was the farmer, Levy, who had told everyone about seeing Mumbi pregnant. The landowner next to her, Appel, who had been trying to buy her land, and his wife, Mags, who had become enraged at the fact that Mumbi had a child and she was barren. Mags had come along because she wanted to see the monster child born to this freak of a woman. They knew of the baby's arrival, not from the cries, because Amari would only smile. They had been keeping watch from a distance and witnessed Mumbi crossing the room with Amari in her arms. Outside, they were throwing around baskets, glasses, and plant pots. This awakened not only Mumbi, but Amari. Once again, Amari did not cry. She simply turned her head towards her mother and watched. Mumbi rose from the bed, walked over to the door, and opened it. At that very moment, two things happened. First, with her head facing the ground, the protection marks on Mumbi's face began to glow. The second was what beckoned Max to walk towards Amari. There was a faint glow coming from the area where she was lying on the bed. Mags walked straight past Mumbi to go look closer at Amari. When she made it to the edge of the bed, Amari's eyes stopped glowing, and this newborn reached her hand up toward Mags. Right then, Appel stood over Mumbi, and Levi began throwing items around the inside of the house. They came with the purpose of destroying Mumbi and her world. Mags looked down towards Amari, and Mag's face lit up. She had never seen such a beautiful child. Even with the eyes the color of gold, she was immediately in love with this child, and she wanted to make her her daughter. She began to think of just how they could make that happen. No one really visited Mumbi. They would not find her body for months or maybe never. Mags looked around, locked eyes with the Pell. With no semblance of decency, she said without pause, I want this child. She is mine, and I'm taking her with us. Appel did whatever his wife wanted. He had not even seen Amari, but his first thought was that Mags wanted the baby. She would have the baby. He responded, then take her. While this was happening, Mumbi began to stand, and fire once again rose in her body. At that moment, Nero's voice echoed for miles. I warned you. I warned you, and you did not listen. From behind Mumbi's body rose clouds. Well, what looked like clouds, but was instead something unexplainable. These clouds took the shape of daggers and all came towards Levi. They went into his skin and liquefied. At that moment, Levi's eyes and mind went blank. He stumbled backwards, then made his way inside the house. Mumbi lost consciousness. Just then, Mags looked at Amari and said, see, she wants to be my baby girl. Then their hands touched. Now they forgot about the legend, myth, about the child who rewards good and punishes evil. Their wicked ways would not allow them. When Amari's finger touched Mag's hand, the vision began. Mags was limping while walking with a cane. Her hair was white, and she had bright red bumps on her face. Everyone who passed quickly made an obvious move to avoid her and stay as far as they could. They pointed at her and, with voices not muted, yelled, see her? She and her husband stole others' land and beat and robbed the elderly. She went to jail and tried to escape only to break both legs and spend an additional 10 years in prison. They threw rocks and spoiled vegetables at her while she hunched down and cried. Mags was still holding Amari's hand when Appel tried to grab her to leave. He saw what had happened to Levi through the window and he was terrified. When he touched Mags, he had a vision of his own. He saw himself and Mags standing over an elderly couple. They had beaten them and ransacked their home. Appel bent over and said, don't worry. We're sure you can clean this up just in time for our next visit. On his face was the look of a man with no consciousness or compassion. He straightened up and left with Max. When they reached the end of the couple's yard and walked out of the gate, which stood 8 feet tall, they came face to face with an adult bear. Max ran back in and closed the gate. Appel, with terror in his eyes, realized that his wife, the one he would do anything for, had abandoned him. When he turned back around, he was mauled by the bear. As the bear took one last swipe, he looked up at the sky with tears in his eyes, then slowly stopped breathing. Now came Levi. He had run into the house and hid behind a chair. He felt chills all over his body and his head hurt. He turned to Mags and Appel and said, we have to go. He reached out for Appel and touched his shoulder. They were all three now locked into their visions, all of which were their futures and what Amari let them see with clarity. For Levi, he saw himself in the middle of his farmland. All of the crops were rotten and his home was being taken by the bank. He was gaunt, weighing around 90 pounds, and had been plagued with visions of monsters with long nails that were the length of the daggers appeared beneath his skin. Every night, one monster would appear before him and say, you have something that is mine. In his dream, one dagger would make its way from under the skin, tearing it and landing in the hand of the monster. Levi, now lucid, fell over and broke their chain of holds. They all left the house screaming and telling all who would listen what happened at Mumbi's house. This child was no longer a myth. She was now on her way to becoming a legend. Moonbi woke up to their screams. She saw them running away and ran as fast as she could to check on Amari. The child, who dealt justice to the mind of these three horrible people, looked up and smiled. She was fine. Now, Moonbi had more questions than answers. What happened while she was passed out?